In the name of God, who is love, beloved, and love overflowing. Amen. One of my favorite scenes in the movie The King's Speech is when Lionel, the future king's speech therapist, plops down on the chair of Edward the Confessor, named after King Edward I. And this is the particular chair that all monarchs have sat on for their coronations since the chair was made in 1296. It contains what is called the Stone of Scone, or scone. It looks like scone to me, but you know, the way the British and the Americans speak English is a tad different. And the name for that stone, translated from the Scottish Gaelic, means the Stone of Destiny. It was captured by King Edward I by his forces, and so it's a symbol of the power of the British monarchy. And the future king, played by, oh gosh, what's his name, Colin Firth, was so incensed that Lionel plopped himself down on that sacred chair, seemingly without any respect for what it represented, that he got very angry. And right there in the, it's really towards the front of the Westminster Abbey, there ensues a nice big fat argument. The future king is just he's, you know, the reality is he was terribly nervous about his brother abdicating and him now having to become king with his stammer. And so he was very nervous. So it's not surprising that something like sitting on the chair would be an issue. But he does lose it, and they argue. And the argument ends with the future king yelling, "I have a voice." And this was the scene that came to my mind when I thought about Job. Now, how weird is that? Welcome to my world. After Job is, spent his almost the entire book, right, wallowing in his suffering, towards the end of the book, he finally finds his voice to complain to God. I think we can all agree that Job had been exceedingly patient. He had been ruminating in his mind, not how could God do this to me, but rather what did I do to deserve this suffering? And then even his friends add insult to injury by saying, well, you must have done something to deserve it, because bad things only happen to bad people, right? You must have broken some commandment or done something that God's mad at. This was what people really believed back then. But Job really doesn't agree with them. He knows he's been fairly scrupulous. I mean, he almost sounds a little on the pompous side. I've been following all these rules and regulations. I've been really following the letter of the law. I've been a good Jew. So how can this possibly be a kind of punishment? But, finally at the end, after mulling this over and over and over in his head, he, like the British future king, stands up and complains to God. He thinks he's been treated very unfairly. He's lost his property, he's lost his children, he's suffered terrible physical agony, and then on top of that, you get these helpful friends that say, oh, it's God's will. Good grief. So Job really does finally have it and lets God have it. And for some of us, the writers of Job gave the kind of answer that only a fallible human being could give. I mean, the Bible is not dictated from God, right? No one had a tape recorder or, a digital recording system with them for when the holy words came down from on high. But the writers of Job, being fallible human beings, could only come up with basically, in effect, saying that, well, we can't see the whole big picture. But and frankly, that makes a lot of sense to me. There are always going to be unanswered questions. Oh, sneeze. Excuse me. There are always going to be unanswered questions. There's always going to be mystery. And our great big minds are not always going to have the answers as to why things happen. Particularly, why do good people seem to suffer? Why do innocent people seem to suffer? Why do wars continue on and on and on? Even particularly by people who are who have been the victims of wars. You know, I often see videos of folks in various places, Phoenix and Philadelphia, that are suffering from this drug called tranq, and they literally turn into human zombies. It's a kind of a high that's like heroin that lasts for days, and they just really do. They really look like complete zombies. Why does that happen? Why do people choose that? Why, when they see their friends or people they know in that state, why do they get into it? Why do innocent children get cancer? Why, in supposedly the richest country in the world, do children go hungry? There's always, always questions that we would love to have an answer for. Sometimes the answer is, you know, we lead with our egos and not with our hearts. Sometimes the answer is that we don't share the abundance of what we have, or that a select few who have even more abundance than we could imagine, simply don't share either. But a lot of these questions really are unanswerable. They're way beyond probably our understanding, because we're only considering these questions from a particular level of consciousness. But here's what I believe the real question is. I mean, we could get totally stuck and bitter, and I think many atheists have gotten bitter about belief in God, because why do children suffer? But I would say that is not the right question. I would ask Job, and I think we should ask ourselves, do we really believe that living, practicing a life of faith, according to whoever is, practicing whatever religious tradition, is a transaction that provides a payoff, like no suffering? I mean, there are plenty of preachers out there who teach this by what's referred to the prosperity gospel, that if you have faith in God, you will have health and wealth and happiness. Nothing bad will ever happen to you. That's a bunch of hooey. I mean, we all know that by now. Innocent people, faithful people suffer for no apparent reason. Again, this is a faith based on a transactional idea of a relationship with God. We believe, God delivers. Or do we believe that living a righteous life according to whatever our religious tradition is creates not a transactional relationship with God, but a transformational relationship with God? There's a big difference. And as I said, there are many churches that preach this. We're the only way. We are the only ones with the truth, and God will bless you if you do X, Y, Z, belong to our church or whatever. But I really think the question is your religious tradition transformational? To believe that the purpose of our faith tradition is that we will all learn how to evolve and care for one another is, I think, the central tenet of most, if not all, religions. We don't have to come up with pithy little manipulative, annoying reasons. I mean, I just said this to someone the other day. I remember when someone shared in a meeting that their puppy just ran out into the street and was killed, was hit by a car. And some little girl, bless her heart, said, "Oh, God must have needed that puppy more than you." You know, these are the kinds of, this is doing violence to one another, and we don't even know it, you know. It is a transactional faith. If A, then B. But that's not how God works. I mean, God is the ruler of the upside down kingdom, where the first are going to be last and the last are going to be first. So it's not going to be a transactional faith that we are practicing. It's going to be a transformative faith, that something about suffering is going to change us, and hopefully for the better. We are only seeing a very small part of the big picture, the big universal picture of why things happen and why does the world work the way it does. Even great scientists have to say that they only have a hypothesis, you know, because even great scientific theories change as we understand more and more. So, and Thomas Merton even said this, you know, years and years ago, that we only understand according to our level of consciousness. And as our level of consciousness, however you want to say it, deepens or goes higher or whatever, then we understand a little bit more differently. And so some of us have a spiritual understanding at a very elementary level, which is, you know, really what I would call fundamentalism. That fundamentalism is kind of like the elementary school of religion. But as we go deeper into understanding the metaphor of our religion, the metaphors in our scriptures, then we go deeper in understanding, and we don't have to come up with these pithy little sayings and quick little answers that may or may not have any validity in them. As we increase in our understanding, we begin to be able to accept that, like the Buddha has said, life has suffering. End of discussion. There is suffering. Why? Darned if I know. Sometimes it's because human beings are horrendous to each other, but sometimes there are just no reasons. But it's not about a transaction between you and God, or between someone who is suffering and God. It's a truth, but a truth with a promise, like much of our faith, that we can actually experience suffering and something good can come out of it. You know, God is the one who, you know, spreads his seeds of love and grace extravagantly, doesn't even think about it, doesn't care if there's tons and tons of seeds of grace and love and forgiveness thrown all over the world. It just keeps coming. God doesn't keep track. The best we can do is to experience our suffering when it's our time. You know, I don't think these things are foreseen or anything. And to find a way, with God's help, with God's grace, to grow from that experience in a way that we might be able to help someone else going through it. The big questions we can leave in God's hands. You know, you got big questions? Fine. Wait till you cross over, you know, then ask, you know. But for now, sometimes we don't have answers because we either can't handle them or it's just too much for our minds to grasp. But there are more important things than the answers to these questions sometimes. So when horrendous things, I mean, I can't tell you how many videos I've watched of Western North Carolina and East Tennessee, and even the folks that were affected by Milton in Florida, the level of devastation, how people have lost their entire lives and their loved ones. Oh, it's just horrendous. And we can either choose to despair and say there's no meaning in life whatsoever, or we can accept, learn to accept that sometimes bad things happen to innocent people. I mean, Linda, right? You know, we all have these moments of our life of suffering where there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. But are we going to use those experiences to be transformative either to ourselves and towards others, you know, to be there for others who are going through that suffering? Or do we choose to just get bitter and demand an answer? You can demand answers all you want. I don't think God even holds that against us. But how are we being transformed by the suffering that we are either witnessing or experiencing? I think that's really the question, because I don't think there's a human being on this planet who will not go through suffering. All of us will. The possibilities for transformation, on the other hand, those are endless. If we choose to empathize with others in their pain and be there for them, or if we choose to just shut down, really, that's all in our hands. But transformation really does happen when you reach out. And I think that's one of the main lessons we can learn from the fact of life having suffering. I've said something before, and I'll say it again. It is controversial, but I kind of believe this. My teacher told me this a long time ago. God will not protect us from anything, but will sustain us in all things. As I said, that will sound radical, but it's the only way I can wrap my head around the fact that many innocent people will suffer. And many not uninnocent, how do you say, non-guilty people will suffer as well. But I can't really say that God will protect us from all things if we, do this transaction in our head. If I pray enough, if I'm good enough, if I'm do good service works enough, then I won't suffer. No, you're a human being. You're going to suffer. We're all fallible. No, I guess it really is more about God has the power to sustain us in all kinds of situations. I heard a story the other day about a man who was found and rescued from the mud in Western North Carolina. And he has to go on with his life knowing that his loved ones didn't make it. And again, he has the choice. He has the free will. We can choose to be bitter about that, shut down, and do nothing but harm to ourselves. Or we can choose to try to be there for the next person who may have lost loved ones as well. Always a choice. We're always on a choice, on a journey of transformation. Each one of us is going to have our challenges, our joys, our trials, our triumphs, but if you are a human being, whether you're a faithful super Christian or not, you're going to experience some suffering in your life. What we do with that suffering, that's what matters. In the epistle to the letter to the Hebrews, it says, every high priest is chosen from among mortals and is put in charge of things pertaining to God to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He or she is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he or she is subject to weakness. And I don't know for how many millennia we have put religious leaders on a pedestal. But the best we can say is that religious leaders are all wounded healers. We aren't any better than the rest of you. We're just called to a particular job, so to speak, whereas others of you are called to do another kind of job, even within the same faith community. You know, some of you are much better teachers than I ever will be. Some of you are much better researchers than I ever will be. On the other hand, none of you, I think, wants to read as much theology as I do. It's just kind of put you right to sleep. But that's the kind of stuff that I love, you know. Same thing for prayer and meditation. We all just have different jobs. Nobody is better than the other person. Nobody has a better transactional relationship with God. But we all are on the same level, all together, trying to be open enough and vulnerable enough, which is always a scary word, to be transformed by God. So we are really, truly the priesthood of all believers. We're all wounded healers, and it's just that we all have different jobs. And so when we recite in our baptismal covenant, when we have either baptisms or high holy days, whatever, we always say that we promise to practice our faith, I will with God's help. Because none of us, I mean, I really don't believe in any kind of thing like a super Christian or a super Jew or anything like that. We're all just sort of muddling through together, doing the best we can. But we can do amazing things with God's help. And so I think that's a little taste of humility, as opposed to what the disciples did. Hey, we want to be great. I want to sit at your right hand, Jesus. Well, great, but you got to suffer too, and you got to learn from that, and you have to be transformed by that suffering. You're going to drink this cup. I mean, that's basically what Jesus is saying. You can't just have everything handed to you on a silver platter. But out of horrendous experiences, God can bring the most amazing strength through others to really help others. I mean, that's the whole idea right behind the 12-step self-help groups, right? It doesn't matter which one. None of them have great answers, but they have all had different experiences that they can share that others can learn from. And so then you have lots of choices for the next step you want to take. So I think this is really, I think the important lesson here is from Job today. That, and the gospel, obviously, things are not handed over to us on a silver platter. We will learn by experience. And that's how all the mystics have learned. What we do with that experience is really what matters to the world, you know. If we use our experiences to help others, that the world gets just transformed. There's no doubt about it. I think it's just a good lesson to remember. No transactional relationship with the God of love. Amen.